Billionaire never thought his twin girls could smile again, until he saw his black maid doing this. The first time the house fell silent, it wasn't because of the absence of noise. It was because of the absence of laughter. Ethan Cole had built empires out of chaos. He had turned failing companies into billion-dollar giants, made ruthless decisions without blinking, and commanded rooms full of powerful people with nothing more than a glance. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the stillness that settled inside his home after that night. The night his wife didn't come back. Before that, the mansion had been alive. Two small voices echoed through its marble halls, their laughter bouncing off glass chandeliers and polished floors. Ava and Arya, his twin daughters, were identical in face but completely different in spirit. Ava was bold, loud, always asking questions. Arya was gentle, observant, always holding onto her sister's hand like it was her anchor to the world. And then, suddenly, they stopped. No laughter, no questions, no smiles. They spoke less each day, their eyes dimming in a way that terrified Ethan more than any boardroom failure ever could. Doctors were brought in, therapists, specialists, the best money could buy. Trauma, they all said. Give them time, time. Ethan had always believed time was something you controlled, invested, multiplied. But now, time felt like a slow punishment. Each day passed, and his daughters drifted further into silence. He tried everything. He bought them toys they once loved, rooms filled with dolls, games, books. Untouched. He hired entertainers, clowns, magicians. The girls barely looked up. He even tried to be different himself. Left work early, sat with them, spoke softly, read bedtime stories in a voice he barely recognized as his own. Nothing worked. It was like the light inside them had been switched off. And Ethan, for the first time in his life, felt completely powerless. 3 months later, the house gained a new employee. Her name was Lillian. She wasn't part of the original staff. In fact, Ethan barely remembered approving her hiring. She came recommended by the head housekeeper, someone Ethan trusted enough not to question. Lillian was quiet, efficient, and almost invisible in the way she moved. She kept her head down, spoke politely, and never overstepped. Her skin was a rich, warm brown, her hair tied neatly back, and her eyes held something calm. Something steady. Ethan didn't pay much attention at first. To him, she was just another employee. Another person in a house that had started to feel more like a museum than a home. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Ethan had returned early from work. Another pointless meeting, another hollow victory that felt meaningless the moment he stepped into his silent mansion. He expected the usual scene. The twins sitting quietly in the living room, side by side, staring at nothing. But they weren't there. A flicker of panic shot through him. He moved quickly through the house, his footsteps echoing louder than usual. Ava, Arya, he called out, his voice tight. No answer. He reached the hallway leading to the staff quarters when he heard something unexpected. A sound, soft, unfamiliar, laughter. He froze. It was faint, almost like a memory, but unmistakable. Laughter. His heart began to pound. He followed the sound slowly, as if afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. It led him to a small open doorway at the end of the hall, a room usually used for storage. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, he saw them. Ava and Arya sat on the floor. But they weren't silent. They weren't distant. They were engaged. In front of them sat Lillian. She wasn't dressed like a maid anymore, or at least, not in that moment. She had tied a colorful scarf around her head like a makeshift crown, and she was using a wooden spoon as if it were a magic wand. Her voice shifted dramatically as she spoke, acting out characters with exaggerated expressions. And the brave princess said, she declared, raising the spoon high, I'm not afraid anymore. Ava giggled. Arya covered her mouth, trying to hold back a smile, and failing. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had forgotten what that sound felt like. Lillian continued, completely unaware she was being watched. She mimicked a dragon's roar, then pretended to trip dramatically, falling onto the floor in an over-the-top fashion. The girls burst into laughter. Real laughter, not forced, not polite, but deep, genuine laughter that filled the small room and spilled into the hallway where Ethan stood frozen. Tears stung his eyes before he even realized they were there. He gripped the doorframe, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. 3 months. 3 months of silence. And somehow, this woman, this quiet, invisible maid, had done what no one else could. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. Instead, he stood there, watching as Lillian continued her performance. She shifted into a softer tone, telling a story now, one about 2 sisters who lost their way in a dark forest but found light again by holding on to each other. Ava leaned closer. Arya rested her head gently on her sister's shoulder. Ethan noticed something then. The story wasn't random. It wasn't just entertainment. It was intentional, careful. Every word, every gesture, it all felt like it was meant for them. For their pain, for their healing. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep, peacefully, for the first time in months, Ethan sat in his study, staring at the floor. He couldn't shake the image from his mind. The laughter, the smiles, the way Lillian had reached them. There was something he didn't understand. Something he needed to. He pressed the intercom. "Send Lillian to my office." A few minutes later, there was a soft knock. "Come in." Lillian stepped inside, her posture straight but her expression calm. "You called, sir." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You were with my daughters today." It wasn't a question. She nodded. "Yes, sir." "Why?" There was no hesitation in her answer. "They looked lonely." Simple. Honest. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Do you often perform like that?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Only when it's needed." Something about that answer made him pause. "Where did you learn to do that?" For the first time, Lillian hesitated. Then she said quietly, "I used to work at a children's care center. For kids dealing with trauma." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Used to." She nodded. "It shut down." "Why?" "Funding," she replied simply. The room fell silent. Ethan felt something shift inside him. "You knew what they needed," he said slowly. "I recognized it," she corrected gently. He leaned forward. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this? About your experience?" Lillian met his gaze, calm and steady. "Because I didn't come here for that, sir. I came here for a job." There was no bitterness in her voice. No resentment. Just truth. Ethan sat back, absorbing her words. For months, he had been searching for solutions in expensive places, high-end experts, elite professionals, while the answer had been quietly working under his own roof. Invisible, unnoticed, until now. The next morning, something changed. The house felt lighter. Ava and Arya still spoke softly, still held on to each other, but now, there was something new in their eyes. A spark. At breakfast, Ava asked for pancakes. It was the first request she had made in weeks. Arya smiled when the chef brought them. Ethan watched, his chest tight with emotion he couldn't fully name. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, both girls looked toward the doorway. "Is Lillian coming today?" Arya asked quietly. Ethan swallowed. "Yes," he said. "She is." Ava grinned. And just like that, the silence that had haunted the house began to fade. Days turned into weeks. Lillian became a constant presence in the twins' lives, not replacing anyone, not overstepping, but simply being there. She told stories, played games, listened, really listened, and slowly, piece by piece, Ava and Arya began to come back to life. They started talking more, laughing more, even arguing with each other again, something that made Ethan smile more than it should have. The house was no longer a museum. It was a home again. One evening, Ethan stood in the doorway once more, watching as Lillian sat between the twins, helping them build a small castle out of blocks. "You're doing it wrong," Ava insisted. "No, you are," Arya shot back. Lillian chuckled. "Maybe there's no wrong way. Just different ways." The girls paused. Then, slowly, they adjusted their blocks, working together this time. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had spent months trying to fix everything. And yet, the thing that healed them wasn't control, or money, or power. It was patience, kindness, presence, things he had forgotten in his relentless pursuit of success. That night, after the girls were asleep, Ethan found Lillian in the kitchen. "You changed everything," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, sir. They did. I just gave them space to find their way back." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her this time. Not as an employee, not as someone invisible, but as someone who had given his daughters something priceless. Something he couldn't buy, and in that moment, he realized something else. Sometimes, the people who make the biggest difference are the ones no one thinks to notice.